gentle marketers. Welcome to season number 7 and episode 51 of the Gentle Business Revolution podcast, the show where we talk about marketing your business by disrupting the current marketing paradigm and changing it to a gentler approach, one that's based on empathy and kindness. As always, I'm Rose Neligan, I'm the host here, and you know that you're in the right place if you are a heart-centered entrepreneur or change maker who is looking for a better way to market your business. Or you might also be a marketing impact pioneer, so someone who's working for a bigger organization, but one that does business for good. This episode falls under the P of passion and purpose, and more specifically, we're talking about not knowing your calling together with my friend Kat Rose from the creativeintrovert.com. Real quick before we begin, quick announcement. In about 3 months from now, I'll be running a Kickstarter campaign for my upcoming Gentle Marketing Revolution book. And I talk more about this in episode 50 when I shared my latest book update. I really look forward to it. I think it'll be really fun, and I'd love for you to participate. So I already set up a pre-launch page, and you can find it by going to sarahsenecroce.com/Kickstarter. I'll also put the link in the show notes. For now, it's just a kind of a pre-launch page that's there, but I'd love for you to give me some Kickstarter love over there, and then you get notified when we go live in December. And of course, I'll keep you posted here too, what I'm working on, what's all the things that go into creating a Kickstarter campaign and all of that. So sarahsenecroce.com/Kickstarter. So back to this episode. So today, as I said, we're talking about our calling and how to find it and what to do if we don't find it. How much we want to actually control our calling. So that's a question I asked Kat, and we go into that, like how much has the ego and this notion of control to do with our calling? And then Kat shares her cupcake versus breadcrumbs decision-making process. You'll just have to listen to the whole episode to find out what this cupcake versus breadcrumbs thing is. We also talk about vision boards and whether to do them or not, and so much more. Kat Rose is from London and currently lives by the sea in Brighton, UK. She works with creative introverts who dream of making a living from their art in a way that feels good to them. She does this through her weekly show, The Creative Introvert, so another podcast that I highly recommend you check out if you fall into this introverted spectrum. She talks about astrology and also has an online community called the League of Creative Introverts. Also, in full disclosure, Kat is the one that helped me in the initial times to put the book together. So really, we had 6 sessions together, and she really just helped me with the structure of the book. So really, I love her creative approach and just how deep we can go together. So without further ado, here's Kat and I talking about calling or not finding your calling. Enjoy. Hi, Kat. So good to speak to you again. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you, Sarah. Yeah, it's always good for us to have a chat.
Yeah. I wanted to get you on to talk about a topic that I saw you posting on your podcast, The Creative Introvert. And I'm always kind of talking about that as well. I had one episode where I shared the story of me finding my why, or my why finding me, or however you want to turn it. But this idea of, finding your calling or not finding your calling or not knowing what your calling is. So kind of a conversation around that, right? Because it seems like you've been doing a lot of thinking around that topic as well.
Yeah, I have. But I still feel the form that it's in now is quite a recent thing. Mm-hmm. And I've been reflecting on this a lot recently. So we can talk about various reflections. But one thing that has struck me recently was that let's say the early days of the Creative Introvert. So this is when I first started the online business, started blogging, eventually podcasting. And I realize now that my main like why, or at least like my main drive, I mean, maybe we need to talk about what meaning and purpose and calling actually is. But anyway, the thing that was kind of getting me out of bed in the morning at the beginning was productivity. Like, how can I do more? And getting a big kind of kick out of that. This ultimately kind of transformed into effectiveness, especially when I kind of found the work of Tim Ferriss and, started to be like, no, I don't have to work as much. It's more about like, how effective am I getting things done? And then that went on for a little while. And a lot of my earlier podcasts are based around subjects touching on that. And then that kind of dropped away. I mean, who knows how? Maybe that's something I need to look at. But I had this, I think it's 2018. Yeah, that was my year of fun. I don't know if you remember that, when I was doing like a weekly fun thing.
Yes.
And this is kind of my attempt to loosen up a bit and maybe find, without using those words, but kind of finding meaning in more diverse things in life, let's say, rather than what my output was. And then more recently, this has kind of transformed again into a bigger search about calling and purpose. And yeah, it sounds vague, and it is.
It's interesting because it feels like we kind of were on a similar path, trying to outsmart our way into, our calling, and kind of like fitting the calling to ourselves rather than just kind of following the natural or organic path. And I remember when I first read Simon Sinek's book, Start with the Why, I saw this why as another thing on my to-do list, another thing that I had to check off. And it's like, oh, everybody's talking about this why. I guess I need to kind of figure it out mentally. It was always my mind who had to figure things out, how to now fit into this form of, what was expected of me as a good business owner or as a heart-centered business owner. So, oh, you have to have a why. All right, let me figure this out.
That's so funny. I totally agree with what you're saying about fitting our calling into like our kind of preconceived idea of what that should be. And yeah, I was definitely doing that. Like, I remember one time sending an email to Derek Sivers. I don't know if you know who that is, but really interesting guy. And I was basically kind of having a little breakdown where I was like, I don't think my why is good enough. What do I do? I think it's like, it's selfish. I was like listing all of these things I think was wrong with it. And he was just like, it actually doesn't matter. Like, if the end result is something positive. He gave the example of, if like two brothers, they were both maybe like abused by their parents. One of them goes off and, starts a charity because of that. And one of them goes off and like kills a bunch of people because of that. Their why is the same, but their actual, what they do in the world is very different. So that did get me thinking a lot more.
Yeah. So maybe let's define the calling or the why, or maybe you can also call it destiny and all these terms. So for you, what does that mean? Your calling or your why?
Yeah. So at the moment, it definitely feels like something that is a felt thing. So, because what it actually looks like is obviously going to be quite different for everyone. And the way I'm kind of thinking about it more is this idea of a path that you're, in a way, like, this is probably going to rub some people up the wrong way, but that you're predestined to walk on. And I don't think that path, just because it's predestined, has to be as specific as like, you're destined to build a very big pink house. Like, I don't know where that came from. Yeah, that's quite good. But, I don't think it has to be as specific as that. But there are certain themes. And I do think that my work with astrology has kind of opened me up to these ideas a lot more. But let's say that there are certain like life themes that you kind of, that are maybe unavoidable for you. And when you go against them, that's when we start to get those hints that, something's wrong here. I need to course correct. And this is why I think it feels so difficult when we're in those moments, because we're asking questions like, you know, why am I doing this? What's the purpose? What's the meaning of it all? Because it's out there, but we're not aligned with it. But how do we, I don't know, fit those puzzle pieces together? Yeah, I recently rewatched it, Our American Beauty. Mm-hmm. And this is just like a ridiculous example, but of like somebody basically having a midlife crisis.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's weird because it just made me reflect on like the different ways that somebody might find meaning in their life. And it's really, really, really varied. But I do think it's quite a common experience for people to get to that point of like, something isn't working here. Something is very broken.
I think so. And in a way, it's almost like we have to go that path in order to, actually, no, let me say that again. Maybe for some people, they know immediately and they just follow that from a very early age. They know what their calling is and they just follow that path. For other people, I think we actually need to have these experiences of, you know, breakdowns and then breakthroughs in order to, course correct and say, okay, well, I tried that path. That just didn't work. Let me, you know, now really go deep within and listen. And now I can maybe understand which path is for me. So I really liked Elizabeth Gilbert, who was talking about that, where she explained it with this example of jackhammers and hummingbirds. So the jackhammers, they know from very early on and they just go deeper and deeper and deeper, where the hummingbird is kind of like going from flower to flower to flower and taking little information from one place to the next in order to finally see the big picture and go, oh, that's what I was always supposed to do, meant to do, and getting that big aha, you know, much later on, maybe. Does that resonate with you?
Oh, it really does. And yeah, something I kind of skipped. And it's, I'm just kind of thinking about, like, I always think about Liz Gilbert when it comes to the dark night of the soul, like reading Eat, Pray, Love. And she kind of it describes the like archetypal dark night of the soul at the beginning. And in a way, it's sort of like reassuring to know that that's just what some of us have to experience. And I think it was the thing that I was avoiding and probably still am. I had assumed, I told myself the story all my life. I draw things, like that's my jam, like that's what I do. And you know, I draw things as a hobby now, but it's not really what I'm doing in the world. It doesn't currently feel like that's actually what I'm here for. It's just a very, very enjoyable thing. So when I had to start,
you told yourself the story of that's my calling.
Yeah. And then there's the cognitive dissonance of realizing I'm not even doing that. That's not what I'm known for. Like, it's maybe some people have seen me draw a few things, but it's not like this big thing. It doesn't feel like that.
Right.
Whereas other things that I've been doing, even though there isn't such an easy, nice narrative to them, they feel a lot closer to whatever this path is for me. So like you were saying at the beginning about, you know, not fitting our calling into our own assumption about it, that was something that maybe I've been seeing much more recently myself, and asking those questions like, well, if I can't tell my calling what it is, how can it tell me that? Like, how can I be receptive to that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it was also Liz who was saying, you know, just follow your curiosity. And it feels to me, watching from the outside, that that's what you've been doing with astrology. So what would you say about astrology? Do you feel like you found your calling, or is that just for now, curiosity that you're following?
Yeah, I feel like I'd be very presumptive. Like, I would be jinxing it if I said that was it. But it's interesting, you know, I could look at a couple of things in my chart and be like, oh, actually astrology seems to be, it could be in my chart even. Right. That's interesting. But yes, there are a bunch of other things, other possibilities. All I know is, that idea of like following my curiosity, that has been so helpful. Now, I talk a lot about curiosity as something that helps us in moments of fear. How can we remain kind of curious in those moments and maybe see them through? But it's the same with this. It's like, I guess we are facing some kind of fear. which is, what the hell am I doing with my life? It's staring into the unknown.
Yeah.
That's real challenging for us. We don't know what the story is going to look like, but following those little breadcrumbs that interest us, that's been really helpful for me, and not easy. At times, I've kind of gotten to the place now where I've somehow managed to integrate astrology in with what I'm doing with the Creative Introvert, but that wasn't my first instinct. My first instinct was like, I have to hide this. No one can know about this. It has to be a separate thing. Maybe I have to have like a pseudonym. And then I kind of got over myself and realized that was my ego getting in the way. That was my fear speaking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. In a way, that makes me also think of how our idea of calling, or maybe it's also the definition of success, how that can be influenced by others. So by our parents, our upbringing, and then by society at large as well. So you thinking maybe this astrology thing, I should better hide it. Well, maybe that's because you thought, well, yeah, well, what are people going to think? They're going to think I'm this woo-woo person, or so in a way, these things also get influenced by other people, and really saying, no, this is what I'm here to do. And if that thing doesn't really resonate with the society at large, we're like, well, maybe that's not it. I better hide that thing, right?
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest challenges people face. And I can think back to some of my own stories that I was told, like, let's say the drawing thing, that was encouraged, but not that much. There was still the story of, that's going to be difficult to make a living in, and things like that. And, maybe if I hadn't been told that, there would have been a different story, and maybe my calling would have shaped more to that. Mm-hmm. Other things like my mum being like, oh, why didn't any of you become doctors? You're all like creatives. And, we kind of ignore these things, but they're still there. They still linger as what we think, like you said, society deems acceptable. And certainly, like talking about creativity, introversion, I could get away with. Astrology was like a whole other step. Right. So that's challenging.
Yeah. Also, in a way, these 3 months of coronavirus and confinement, the word control definitely is a big word, I think, that we kind of had to grapple with, because there was literally no more control over anything, never mind talking about controlling your calling. Yeah. So kind of learning to live with this uncertainty and releasing the grip, that's really what these 3 months were about, I think, for many of us. And I'm thinking, if that happened when I was on my journey to find my why, so like 3 years ago, I think that would have really helped me, actually, because it's almost like the world gave us a pause to reflect upon these things, and there was just literally nowhere was there control to be exerted anymore, and so it really gave us that permission to let go of control and just to trust that we will be on our path to find our calling or our why.
Yeah, in a way, as much as I love my control, it's been such a blessing to have that, and not just to kind of undo some of those patterns, but also to create this sense of relief. Like, I didn't realize how much pressure I was kind of putting on myself to have a plan and manifest that, right? That's something that I guess a lot of my earlier content and even more recent stuff has been geared towards, which is, have a vision and then take the steps to make it happen, have a plan. And realizing, partly because of what happened with COVID, but also in my own experience of traveling in 2019, just realizing that you can have all these plans and they're nice. They, like, for somebody like me, an INTJ, that makes me feel quite at ease. And then when it all kind of falls apart, there's definitely a lot of challenge in that. But on the other side of that is a sense of relief, like, oh, the pressure's off. I don't have to follow this plan to a T. there might be something else here. And maybe, like you said, I can just kind of trust that I will be directed, maybe, in a way.
Yeah. Yeah, it's such a somewhat difficult thing to talk about, because on one hand we have these businesses that we want to run and want to succeed, and so there's a lot of doing involved and planning. Right now, as you know, I'm planning this Kickstarter campaign, and there is a lot of planning involved. And so on one hand I'm like, okay, I'm planning these things, but at the same time I'm trying to say, okay, I trust that the right thing will happen and the right people will see it. And so it's a fine line between letting go and yet showing up and actually, implementing. I'm not so much, in favor of the just like manifesting and law of attraction and just sit back and everything will come to me if I repeat it often enough. So in a way, there's somewhere a middle ground where it's both and I find like it's such almost a contradiction, because we're all meditating and trying to live in the present, and at the same time we're continuously planning 6 months, 1 year plans, financial plans, and so all this planning, and yet then we have to meditate even more to be able to focus on the present.
It's a lot to try to do, and it's you just kind of want to throw your hands up in the air at some point. But yeah, I really liked what you're saying about it being both, and what does that look like? And something that also came to mind when you're speaking is this sense of humility and the idea of staying open, which, yeah, I mean, that humility piece is like, I'm not 100% responsible for every good thing that ever happened in my business. Actually, there are a lot of other factors that I couldn't control that have really helped me. And that, takes some humility to kind of think like that. Whereas in the past, when I personally was into the law of attraction, and it was just kind of thinking, I got that because I thought good thoughts, which is just not my way of thinking right now. But yeah, and that thing of like having a plan but staying open. And yeah, similarly, I can see you doing that. And it feels more like a daily process, right? Because we're having our plan, which might stretch out into the distant future. But every day, maybe we're required to check in with ourselves, keep coming back to that question of, does this still feel right? And having that humility to kind of go back and maybe change course if we need to.
Yeah. I also loved how you described this decision-making process, where you had this example of the cupcake versus the breadcrumbs. So can you explain?
Yeah. So of course it had to be a food-based analogy. So my idea is kind of, it works because it's visual, right? So for me, the path is like literally a path, let's say. And on that path, we've heard the Jack and Jill story. It's not Jack and Jill. It's, who am I thinking about? The two kids who go to a forest and...
Yeah, Hansel and Gretel.
Hansel and Gretel, not Jack and Jill. Anyway, poor Hansel and Gretel. And there's this idea of breadcrumbs leading to the path.
Yeah.
Anyway, maybe the mythology there gets a little bit messy, but the cupcake is something that looks way more appealing than the breadcrumb. But this is something that would take us further away from the path that we're meant to be on. And that's kind of what I mean about this decision-making process. When we're at a crossroads, maybe we can ask ourselves, does this seem like a breadcrumb, which, even if it's not very substantial looking now, maybe it can turn into something and lead back to the path? Or is this the cupcake, which I know I'm going to get like an instant hit of like sugar and good feelings from it, but ultimately it won't be very satisfying. And like as a kind of more realistic example, we might see this in times when somebody is asked, they're not loving their job, and then their boss calls them in and wants to give them a promotion. And they were just about to they were thinking about handing in their notice, but this promotion becomes a cupcake and it feels very appealing. But they have to kind of be honest with themselves and think, actually no, that Etsy store that I've been building in the background is actually, it's growing slowly but steadily. It's not as attractive as this big promotion, but and there you have a kind of decision to make. And if somebody is learning to get in tune with what those breadcrumbs are, I think that's ultimately what's going to lead them onto the path.
Yeah, I love that. I think at the same time, obviously we don't always know, we don't see ahead, right? So we don't exactly know, okay, here's my 10 next breadcrumbs. So sometimes we have to go to the next cupcake and then go, oh, wow, that really wasn't so fulfilling as I thought. And so then it's like, well, here's my next breadcrumb. So I think it's difficult to, already be able to connect the dots or the breadcrumbs if you don't, like most of us don't know what's coming, what the next thing is. But I think you will notice, and it's a feeling thing, as you said in the beginning, it's a feeling thing. You notice whether this is a breadcrumb or a cupcake, whether it's an instant hit of, usually it's the instant hits are for the ego, right?
Yeah, totally.
I made a bunch of money. I got promoted. I, spoke on a big stage. Those are the big hits and the cupcakes, and where the breadcrumbs, maybe right now we don't even know how they'll have an impact and where the future breadcrumbs are going to be. But you know that they somehow, it will add up to a path.
Completely. And I think, just to reassure people out there who do think that sounds very challenging, yeah, it was for me. I'm not the most naturally intuitive person, or at least that's the story I'm telling myself. And I've had to kind of be patient with that and make a deliberate effort to practice just feeling, okay, what does this moment in time, how do I feel right now? Journaling really helps me with that. But also just then kind of getting into that habit of doing that feelings check. And I have noticed that if I'm not like, we all have different ways of responding to things. There was a great book I read about intuition, which I will give you the link for the show notes, because the author's name, Lynn Robinson, I think that's her name. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And she gives like very practical steps for different techniques of kind of developing this sense of intuition. And I found it very helpful. But yeah, and like you said, over time, not instantly for most people, but over time, those breadcrumbs decisions do feel a certain way. And yeah, and it's definitely not linear. It's like I'll still make a lot of cupcake based decisions, but we learn from those.
Yeah. Yeah. It reminds me that, and you know this because you helped me with my book that I'm writing, right? And it reminds me at the end, I kind of talk about integrating and, going maybe from a more traditional marketing model to a gentle marketing model. And I do say, well, there are going to be cupcake decisions. I don't refer to the cupcakes because I didn't hear you talk about that yet. But in a way, it's like, well, make sure you're safe first. I think that's what cupcake decisions is about as well. It's like, let's make sure that we are safe. We have food on the table. Those are also, in a way, cupcake decisions. And we have to keep taking those because otherwise it's, again, a bit too much in the, just trusting the universe out there, which is great. But at the same time, we all still have bills to pay. So
yeah,
it's a slow transition. And also not to be too hard on ourselves if we do make those cupcake decisions.
Yeah, I love that. I'm really glad you brought up the point about safety, and because it would be really, I think, irresponsible for me to even say to myself, oh, Kat, just go with the flow, trust the universe. And while I do think that there is guaranteed going to be moments where we have to have trust or faith into our intuition and these breadcrumbs that we might choose, because they're not guaranteed things. It's usually not like a logic-based rational decision. But on the other side of that, it's like, are we being sensible enough to be taking care of our basic needs? Because it's honestly like, I don't think any breadcrumb is worth it if if you're feeling so scared that you're, like freaking out, having panic attacks, like it's just not worth it. Like I have enough faith in my intuition that it won't let me get so scared, or say, I kind of personify it as a daimon, actually a little fox. But I don't think that being, this imaginal being, would make me do something that felt so terrifying. It's still, even if it was, ultimately the thing that I end up doing, it would be like, okay, that's too scary for you right now. Take the cupcake now and you'll still get back to your path. But that's where you're at, and that's good. Yeah. So again, we have, I think, a decent amount of wiggle room with all of this. Just because we chose a cupcake once doesn't mean we won't get back onto the path.
Yeah, that's so good. So in a way, you're saying your intuition will also tell you what's safe and what's not safe.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think the example I gave in that podcast about the calling was, or maybe it's about the daimon. Socrates described his daimon, or you could think about it as his intuition or inner voice. And it wouldn't tell him what to do. It would just tell him what not to do. So in a way, it was like quite the opposite. It wasn't telling him to take these like scary leaps. I mean, some of the decisions I'm sure were quite scary. I'm pretty sure it told him not to run away when people were going to kill him. So it kind of ended up getting him killed. But anyway, it is interesting to think that, it doesn't guarantee that we're going to end up having to do things that don't feel like we can get some sense of safety in them. There is a safe way of doing these things. I'm sure of it.
Yeah, it's reassuring, because I think sometimes this word intuition already has this connotation of, oh, that's just a bunch of woo-woo, and that's gonna take the not pragmatic decisions. But what you're saying is like, no, your intuition will also make sure that you're first of all safe, and then from there, yes, it will help you find your path, but always making sure that first of all you're safe and your bills are paid. So I think that's very reassuring, and hopefully gets people to listen more to their inner voice, or what do you call it, daemon?
Yeah. It's, I guess that's an old Greek word for it, but different cultures have had this idea of a being that is guiding us actually back to our path, right? Back to whatever we were here to do. And this is like I guess a mythological idea, but it just still feels very practical, honestly, in my INTJ brain. Like for me, it's a lot easier to think of a being than to think of this abstract scientific idea. Yeah. So
it's interesting. I'm sure that has something to do with personality types, and like you said, you're a INFTJ. No.
Yeah, INTJ.
Where for me, the INFJ, the intuition is kind of almost built into my wiring, and so I don't have this mental block towards what the heck is intuition, anyways. So it's really interesting to hear that it helps you kind of picture that in a being form, rather than just think it's this vague thing that I need to trust. So.
Yeah, I'd be interested in asking your audience about that, like, because I feel like I do need visuals to make sense of things, but I feel like that, like you said, is more of a T thing than an F thing.
Maybe.
So interesting.
As we send our listeners off on their own path, to find their calling, or let their calling find them, what kind of advice or wisdom would you send them with?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to be just going over the same thing again, because I tell people to do this a lot, but I do think having a writing practice of some kind is really helpful with this. So for me, different people have different ways of doing this, but Jess Lively is somebody who's shared a lot about this in the past, and was the first person who introduced me to this idea of writing to the inner voice. And this could be like you're asking a question, one of those decisions, one of those potential breadcrumb or cupcake decisions. You actually write it out and kind of pay attention to yourself to see what bubbles up in that moment. And sometimes those questions don't get answers straight away. I have many occasions where I'm just like, yep, I'm getting nothing. This is not my day. But that answer, that question like lingers somewhere and the answer does come. So that has been helpful. Classics like having some kind of contemplative meditation practice. And again, that's going to look different for different types of people, but it could be something to explore if you haven't explored it. And again, remaining curious to what you're getting called to. And I really like that word calling, because it does feel like something is beckoning us and we don't necessarily have to justify it. I think that was one of my problems, was having to justify every decision. Like, why would I do astrology? And instead of just going with it. Yeah.
That's interesting. I wonder where that comes from, this need to justify. I guess it's also the influence of the outside. It's like, like, please explain why you're doing this. It's like, well, I don't know. It's just, that's where my curiosity took me. Yeah, right. Interesting. Well, this has been amazing. Thank you so much for taking the time. I'll make sure to link to those 2 episodes that we mentioned. So the calling and forgot the name again already. Damon. Yep. Please do share also your main website and the name of your podcast.
Yeah, thank you. So that's thecreativeintrovert.com. Same name as the podcast, The Creative Introvert. And yeah, you can find it where all good podcasts are made.
Always fun to hang out with you. Thanks so much for this conversation, Kat.
Thank you so much, Sarah.
I hope you enjoyed this episode. You can find out more about Kat and her work at thecreativeintrovert.com. Check out her podcast under the same name, and check out all the links at the show notes, sarahsanacroce.com/GBR51. Also, our next Gentle Business Circle is coming up on September 9th. So if you share my worldview, I'd love to hang out with you in the Gentle Business Circle. It's a safe zone to hang out with other gentle marketers and help each other build our business and grow our impact. When you join the circle, you get a live monthly circle Q&A call with me and fellow gentle marketers. And of course, if you can't make it live, you get the recordings. They'll be posted in a private platform. You also, as a bonus, get my Authentic and Fair Pricing mini course, as well as secret bonus episodes every now and then. These calls take place once per month, every second Wednesday of the month. And the next one is coming up on Wednesday, September 9th. There are different levels of support, starting out at only $7 per month. You can find out more at sarahsanacroce.com/circle. Next week, I'm back with another great episode about the new kind of leaders and what's required of them to bring forward the change we also desperately are longing for. So, tune back in next week. Talk to you then. Take care.